Okay, tonight, we're stepping into a place where paradise was shattered by silence. In Hawaii, where the ocean meets the sky and the air carries the warmth of tropical calm, the mid-1980s brought an unsolved mystery that left scars far deeper than the waves could erase. It was the story of the Honolulu Strangler, Hawaii's first known serial killer, a figure who turned the image of paradise into a landscape of fear. Welcome to Criminal Mindcast, the podcast where we tell true crime stories not just with facts, but with silence, with the haunting weight of what was never said. Here we do not chase sensationalism. Instead, we linger in the quiet spaces where psychology, trauma, and human darkness intersect. Tonight's journey is called Dark Secrets of the Honolulu Strangler, Hawaii Mystery, Murders Uncovered. A cold case, a dark past, and questions still echoing after nearly 4 decades. The story of the Honolulu Strangler does not begin with the shadow of the killer, but with the women whose lives he stole. They were not celebrities or public figures. They were secretaries, students, mothers and daughters, ordinary women moving quietly through Honolulu, carrying the weight of daily burdens and modest dreams. Yet it was precisely this ordinariness that made them vulnerable. Each woman came from a different background, but together they formed a fragile mosaic of humanity. Behind their smiles lay hidden struggles, strained families, broken relationships, financial stress, and silent isolation. These unspoken burdens shaped not only their lives but also the tragic circumstances of their deaths. Hawaii is often imagined as paradise, sunlit beaches, aloha spirit, and community warmth. But beneath the postcard beauty were fractures, widening economic divides, loneliness in crowded neighborhoods, and family tensions no one spoke of. These cracks became the backdrop for a predator to strike. These were not impulsive crimes, but calculated acts that preyed on vulnerability. The first victim was remembered as cheerful yet weighed down by troubles. Long hours and late-night bus rides left her exposed. Her predictable routine, safe in her eyes, was an opportunity to a watcher in the shadows. The second victim, recently separated from her partner, struggled with loneliness and disconnection. Without strong ties around her, she drifted on society's margins, making her an easy target. A third lived quietly with family secrets, described as independent but withdrawn. For a predator, isolation is not just emotional, it is physical opportunity. By the fourth murder, investigators began to see the chilling pattern. Each woman had been last seen alone, often at night, near transit routes or highways. The emerging profile suggested a man who studied and waited. These were not frenzied attacks, but acts of control, cold, deliberate, and precise. Control sits at the heart of serial violence. It is not simply about killing, it is about mastery. The Honolulu Strangler thrived on invisibility, choosing the exact moment when his victims were most alone. He fed on dominance, turning ordinary routines into fatal traps. In the Honolulu of the 1980s, between paradise and urban strain, anonymity crept in. And within that shifting space, a predator blended into the crowd, harmless on the surface, waiting for the right moment to strike. For the women, life moved forward as it always had. Work, family, friendships. Their routines felt safe precisely because they were ordinary. But predators read ordinariness like a map. What feels familiar to us becomes a silent invitation to them. Early disappearances were brushed aside, treated as isolated tragedies. Families were told their loved ones might have left voluntarily. This indifference reflects not just the victim's vulnerability, but the vulnerability of institutions meant to protect them. The oversight gave the predator time. Bodies appeared in places that told their own story. Near highways, close to airports, along quiet stretches of land. These were not random sights. They revealed a man who knew which places were invisible, which paths avoided notice, and which shadows could swallow evidence. Criminologists argue that killers are not created in a vacuum. The Honolulu Strangler's identity remains unknown, but analysts suggest he may have carried early traumas: neglect, humiliation, resentment. Such wounds harden into obsessions with control. The killings may have been his way of rewriting the power dynamics of his own life. And control here was not only physical, it was psychological domination. By choosing women already burdened with personal stress or isolation, he magnified his sense of power. Their private struggles became his opportunity. Their invisibility became his camouflage. This is the cruel paradox. Society often ignores the quiet suffering of ordinary people. The woman working late shifts, the mother navigating separation, the daughter burdened with secrets. Predators notice what others ignore, and in those cracks, they strike. The Honolulu Strangler's victims did not share the same lives, but they shared vulnerability. They shared invisibility. Their names reached the headlines only once their lives had been extinguished. That irony, recognition through tragedy, is the silent signature of many serial crimes. Psychological analysis hints at motives rooted in resentment, perhaps hatred of women, or the need to reassert dominance after rejection. Whatever the origin, his acts reveal a twisted search for balance. A predator convinced murder was a way to restore control. Yet these women should not be remembered only for their deaths. They were not statistics. They were living beings with hopes, flaws, and humanity. To tell their story is to confront the fragility of safety itself. The dark secrets behind their smiles, family struggles, personal pain, economic pressures, did not cause their deaths. But they were the cracks exploited by someone who turned human vulnerability into a weapon. His intuition, sharpened by malice, thrived in the silent society overlooked. Honolulu in the 1980s offered the illusion of security. Tourists celebrated on beaches, locals kept traditions alive, but underneath lingered the truth. Paradise fractures like any other place. The Honolulu Strangler revealed that fracture. His victims exposed the distance between surface beauty and hidden violence. The psychological profile suggested a man not passing through, but rooted in the community. He walked the same streets, blended into the same crowds. Perhaps he was someone neighbors greeted politely, someone who seemed unremarkable. That ordinariness was his camouflage, the mask that allowed him to vanish into the city he terrorized. Each life taken became part of a larger pattern, victims overlooked, systems unprepared, evil unnoticed until too late. The Honolulu Strangler thrived on invisibility, both his own and that of those he hunted. Together they formed a tragic tableau of unnoticed lives, meeting unnoticed violence. In the end, the story of the Honolulu Strangler ES victims is the story of how ordinary vulnerability collides with extraordinary predation. The women lived in a community that seemed safe. The killer lived in a mind that demanded control. In the brief, fateful moments when their paths intersected, paradise itself was shattered, and the dark secrets of Honolulu emerged. The story of the Honolulu Strangler unfolded slowly, beginning in 1985. What seemed at first like an isolated disappearance soon revealed itself as the opening act of a series of murders that would leave a permanent scar on Hawaii's sense of safety. Each crime carried echoes of the last, bound by method and silence. The first known victim was last seen alive near a busy highway that cut across Honolulu. She never returned home. Days later, her body was discovered in an isolated area, partially concealed, as though the killer both wanted her found and yet erased. This duality suggested a psychological conflict, the need for control, but also for recognition. Investigators noted the condition of her body pointed to strangulation, a form of killing that emphasizes power over chaos. Unlike a weapon, strangulation is intimate. It requires proximity, patience, and a cold willingness to feel the life of another person fade under one's grip. This set the tone for what was to come. Months later, a second woman vanished. She too was last seen traveling alone, returning from work during late hours. Her body was found near the airport, an unsettling location chosen perhaps for its symbolism. Airports represent arrival and departure, movement and anonymity. By leaving her there, the killer may have been underscoring the theme of disappearance. The third victim emerged not long after. Her remains were discovered near a deserted road, a place often avoided even by locals. The site felt chosen with calculation, not convenience. These repeated selections of isolated spaces suggested the offender understood Oahu's geography intimately, exploiting transitional areas where the city's light did not reach. Each crime followed a similar arc: a woman alone, a sudden disappearance, a body abandoned in a liminal place. The consistency revealed deliberation. These were not random acts of violence. They were orchestrated performances of control, designed to affirm dominance while leaving minimal trace for investigators. By the time the fourth victim was found, a clear pattern emerged that could no longer be ignored. She too had been strangled, her body left in an area that merged isolation with visibility. The killer seemed to oscillate between concealment and display, creating confusion for both the police and the public. The fifth and final known victim plunged Honolulu into a state of collective dread. Like the women before her, she vanished under hauntingly familiar circumstances, alone, vulnerable, moving through ordinary routines that had become traps. Her body was later discovered near the airport corridors already marked by tragedy, the same stretches of land that seemed to echo the killer's unseen footsteps. The pattern was undeniable now. Each murder mirrored the last, as though the predator was leaving a signature in silence. For the community, the repetition was more than coincidence. It was a message carved in fear. Strangulation as a method cannot be overlooked. Psychologically, it speaks to an obsession with control and domination. The killer did not seek quick violence. He demanded to feel the gradual surrender of his victims, an act that blurred the line between life and death in a slow, deliberate ritual. The timeline also revealed something disturbing. The intervals between murders grew shorter. This acceleration is common among serial predators. The initial crime satisfies a long-repressed urge, but each subsequent act reignites the hunger more quickly. Control becomes addiction, and the spiral narrows toward inevitability. Despite the consistency, the case ended in silence. Leads vanished as quickly as they appeared. Witnesses offered fragments of sightings, a car, a man, a shadow, but nothing ever held long enough to crystallize into evidence. The killer moved with invisibility, exploiting both the physical terrain and institutional hesitation. Investigators noted that the bodies showed little sign of robbery or overt sexual assault. This detail deepened the psychological mystery. The murders did not appear motivated by theft or conventional lust. Instead, they seemed rooted in an internal compulsion, a psychological theater where domination was the only script. The locations themselves tell their own story. Highways, airports, deserted roads, all are liminal spaces, places of transition. In anthropology and psychology, liminality represents thresholds, the in-between. By leaving bodies in such places, the killer symbolically placed victims at the edge between life and death, presence and disappearance, memory and forgetting. The people of Honolulu watched this timeline unfold with growing dread. What began as isolated tragedy became a pattern too precise to deny. Rumors spread quickly, women changed routines, avoided traveling alone, and families grew suspicious of the night. The murders were no longer hidden events. They were woven into daily life. The timeline of 1985 to 1986 closed with unanswered questions. 5 women dead, 5 families shattered, and an island forever transformed. Yet the identity of the Honolulu Strangler remained obscured. Each body carried silent testimony, but silence cannot name a killer. The murders ended as abruptly as they began, vanishing into uncertainty. Patterns in serial cases often help construct psychological profiles, but here, the absence of resolution became part of the profile itself. Did the killer leave the island? Did he stop satisfied with his performance of domination? Or did he continue elsewhere, carrying his methods into another unsuspecting community? The haunting truth is that the timeline may not be complete. 5 victims are remembered, but the possibility of more remains open. In unsolved cases, silence hides not only the killer, but also the potential scope of their violence. What is known feels certain, but what is unknown remains infinite. The timeline of the Honolulu Strangler is both a record of crime and a riddle left unsolved. Each date etched a tragedy into the island's memory, each victim revealed the killer's need for control, and each location exposed how fragile the boundary was between paradise and predation. In less than 2 years, a place long celebrated for its beauty was transformed into a landscape of fear. Beaches, highways, and airport corridors, once symbols of travel and leisure, became markers of dread. The murders stitched together a chilling map, reminding Hawaii that even beneath its sunlit surface, darkness could move unnoticed. The investigation into the Honolulu Strangler began with urgency as police scrambled to stop a killer who seemed both bold and calculating. Yet what started with determination soon revealed deep fractures that widened as the case unfolded. Detectives developed theories around several suspects, but none could ever be firmly tied to the murders. Leads were chased with energy but not with cohesion, leaving the pursuit fragmented and ultimately ineffective. Each step forward seemed to dissolve into silence, and the Strangler remained hidden in the shadows. One man quickly emerged as the prime suspect, loosely connected to one of the victims. For a time, police were convinced they had their killer. They placed him under constant surveillance, interrogated him repeatedly, and even devised scenarios designed to provoke a confession. But the man never slipped. Without the anchor of physical evidence, suspicion soon gave way to frustration, and the case slipped into uncertainty. The handling of evidence only deepened these failures. Items that may have carried crucial traces of the killer's presence were either ignored, mishandled, or examined with the limited forensic technology available in the 1980s. DNA testing, which today could provide decisive answers, was still in its infancy. Opportunities that might have brought clarity instead vanished, swallowed by errors and the constraints of the time. Witness testimony offered little more than shadows. People reported seeing a suspicious car parked near the airport, a man lingering by a highway, or a fleeting face glimpsed in poor light. But no two descriptions aligned closely enough to create a definitive portrait. Each account offered a fragment of truth, yet together they failed to form the whole. As police efforts stalled, the media took hold of the story with relentless force. Headlines screamed of terror in paradise, shattering Hawaii's carefully cultivated image as a haven of safety and serenity. Each new victim was not only a personal tragedy, but also a public symbol of vulnerability. The island's illusion of security cracked under the weight of newsprint and nightly broadcasts. With every passing month, the frenzy intensified. Journalists filled the silence left by official uncertainty, spinning speculation into narrative and transforming fear into legend. The Honolulu Strangler became more than a man. He became a myth, a shadow haunting the edges of paradise, his image amplified by a media hungry for sensation. For the people of Honolulu, fear became part of daily life. Women who once walked freely began moving in pairs or avoided traveling after dark altogether. Families double-checked their locks, and neighborhoods grew wary of unfamiliar faces. The murders did not only claim lives, they rewrote the rhythms of the island, planting unease in a place once defined by openness. As weeks passed without answers, frustration grew. Each silence from the police chipped away at trust, and each vague promise of progress rang hollow. If authorities could not protect 5 women, who could they protect at all? Grief began to harden into anger, and fear fermented into resentment, directed as much at the investigators as at the faceless killer. Within the police force, theories multiplied, but seldom aligned. Some detectives believed the killer was a local man who knew Oahu's backroads and quiet corners well enough to vanish undetected. Others leaned toward the idea of a transient worker, perhaps military personnel passing through, leaving no routes to follow. But without solid evidence, these theories were fragile, castles in the air, collapsing as quickly as they were built. The longer the case remained unresolved, the more it drifted into myth. The Honolulu Strangler ceased to be just a suspect. He became a faceless shadow, a symbol of the darkness that could hide even among palm trees and ocean breezes. Imagination filled the silence, making the killer larger and more terrifying than reality might ever reveal. Community pressure intensified the cracks in the investigation. Calls for accountability grew, but with little evidence, the police were caught between action and impotence. To admit failure was unthinkable. To claim progress was dishonest. The investigation remained suspended, a body moving without breath, alive in name, but paralyzed in practice. As years passed, the cold case became part of Hawaii's dark folklore. The murders were whispered about in classrooms, recounted in late-night conversations, and held up as warnings to younger generations. What began as tragedy had transformed into a cultural scar, a reminder that paradise was not immune to human darkness. Psychologically, the investigation revealed a deeper truth about fear and authority. People rely on systems of protection, believing institutions hold power over chaos, but when those systems falter, the fear intensifies. The unknown killer was not just one man, he was the embodiment of powerlessness in the face of failed justice. The Honolulu Strangler was never formally identified, never charged, and never even conclusively linked to the crimes in the public record. This enduring silence did more than obscure the truth. It deepened the gravity of the murders themselves. Justice denied, or perhaps merely delayed, became the refrain echoing across decades, louder and more haunting than any official verdict could have been. As with all storms, the media frenzy eventually subsided. Headlines shifted to other crises, and the island moved forward on the surface. Yet for the families of the victims, the silence never ended. Their loved ones were frozen in memory, names turned into headlines, faces into black and white photographs. Around dinner tables, in family gatherings, the empty chairs remained, reminders of lives stolen and stories unfinished. The investigation's collapse left behind questions that have never been resolved. Did the killer live quietly among neighbors, hidden in plain sight? Did he leave the island and vanish into anonymity somewhere far from Hawaii? Or does he still breathe the same air, carrying secrets no confession has ever revealed? What began with urgent police theories and frenzied headlines ultimately faded into one of Hawaii's darkest unsolved mysteries. The Honolulu Strangler AS legacy demonstrates not only the fragility of justice, but also the human hunger for closure. Where truth is absent, silence remains, and silence is rarely merciful. The Honolulu Strangler's crimes revealed more than physical violence. They reflected a pattern of domination, psychological manipulation, and the desire to transform human life into an object of control. Such behaviors align with trauma psychology, where an individual's inner fractures manifest outwardly through acts of cruelty. This was not random chaos, it was violence calculated to establish power. The profile suggested that the killer may have carried early scars, perhaps rooted in rejection, humiliation, or abuse. Research on serial offenders shows that unresolved trauma often mutates into obsession. In the quiet corridors of the mind, humiliation may ferment into rage, and the rage transforms into a need for mastery over others. The Honolulu Strangler's acts echoed this cycle. Every victim shared vulnerability. Women alone caught in transitional spaces like roadsides or airports, liminal zones between safety and danger. The choice of setting was deliberate. By targeting these fragile boundaries, the killer amplified both control and terror. It was not merely about ending life, but about demonstrating dominance in spaces where people assumed safety. Psychologically, strangulation itself is an intimate act. Unlike a weapon that distances the killer, strangulation requires presence, physical force, and prolonged contact. It is slow, deliberate, and deeply personal. Such a method often points to offenders who seek not just to kill, but to exert absolute control over the last breaths of another human being. From a criminological perspective, this aligns with the power control typology of serial killers. These individuals find gratification not in the act of killing alone, but in the symbolic conquest it represents. Each act becomes a reenactment of past wounds, rewritten through dominance. The Honolulu Strangler may have been reliving his own powerlessness, reversing roles through violence. The psychological roots of such behavior can be interpreted through different philosophical lenses. Stoic philosophy teaches that suffering is an inevitable part of existence, yet warns against being consumed by passions. The Strangler embodies the antithesis, a man enslaved by his impulses, unable to transform pain into wisdom. Instead, he lets suffering become contagion. In Christian thought, his actions reflect the darkness of free will misused. If human beings are called to channel their wounds into compassion, the Strangler chose inversion, creating cycles of destruction instead of redemption. Each act of violence was not only a crime against the victims, but also a violation of his own humanity. Buddhism would frame his actions as attachment to anger, a karmic chain binding him to suffering. By refusing release from his trauma, he perpetuated cycles of harm, His acts became a distortion of the search for relief, a twisted attempt at control that only deepened his bondage to suffering. From a Confucian perspective, his crimes represented the collapse of societal harmony. Confucianism emphasizes order, balance, and the integrity of relationships. To murder women within a community was not only to harm individuals, but to destabilize the moral rhythm of the entire society. The Strangler disrupted the collective trust that holds families and neighborhoods together. The aftermath of the crimes underscores this disruption. Honolulu was never the same after the murders. Fear entered the bloodstream of the city, a quiet anxiety that endured long after headlines faded. Families altered behaviors, daughters were raised with stricter warnings, and the illusion of safety within paradise was permanently cracked. For the victims' families, trauma psychology reveals a parallel to the killer's own brokenness. Where he sought control, they were left with powerlessness. Grief became entangled with uncertainty, because no conviction ever closed the wounds. Incomplete justice prolongs trauma, denying survivors the resolution necessary to heal fully. The silence of the case is almost as haunting as the murders themselves. It reflects not only the killer's cunning, but also the limitations of human institutions. Police error, forensic limitations, and societal denial converged to allow darkness to persist unchallenged. In this silence, the Honolulu Strangler remains both absent and omnipresent. Modern criminologists suggest that DNA technology and investigative genealogy could reopen the case. Cold cases around the world have been solved by linking genetic material to family trees, turning anonymity into identification. If biological traces remain from the Strangler's crimes, science may yet unmask the figure who walked unseen through paradise. Yet even with this hope, another question remains. Would unmasking the killer truly restore balance? Or would it only confirm what is already known, that human beings are capable of profound cruelty, even in the most beautiful landscapes? Truth, when it finally arrives, may offer closure, but it will not erase fear. The Honolulu Strangler also forces us to confront the psychology of community memory. Decades after the crimes, the island still carries the ghost of those events. Stories told in whispers, warnings passed down through generations, and the enduring absence of justice all reinforce the long shadow of trauma. Memory itself becomes a prison. For scholars of criminal psychology, the Honolulu Strangler case serves as a stark reminder that killers are not shaped in isolation. They are products of the societies they move within. The Strangler thrived in an environment where vulnerability lingered in the margins, where daily transitions between safety and risk could be exploited. Even the geography of Oahu, with its highways, transit routes, and isolated spaces, became part of the killer's psychological map, a stage upon which predation could unfold. Trying to define the Strangler's motive is an exercise in shadows. Revenge, opportunism, or a darker compulsion rooted in domination. Each possibility carries weight, and perhaps the truth lies in their convergence. What remains undeniable is the deliberate repetition. Each crime carried an echo of the one before, a ritualized pattern that demanded recognition. These acts were not impulsive, they were signatures carved into the very fabric of the community. Yet decades later, the silence lingers. Silence itself is a form of violence. It robs families of closure, denies the community resolution, and allows fear to fester unchecked. The Honolulu Strangler may have vanished, but the questions left behind keep his presence alive. In those unanswered questions, his shadow endures. The Honolulu Strangler lingers in memory as a spectral reminder that even the most beautiful landscapes can conceal unspeakable horrors. His case, unsolved and unresolved, illustrates how fear does more than haunt. It reshapes communities, alters daily routines, and silences trust that once felt unshakable. The scars left behind are not only personal but collective, etched into the psyche of an island that once believed itself untouchable. Justice delayed often feels like justice denied, and with every year of silence, the weight of absence grows heavier. In the reflection of this mystery, fear becomes a mirror, forcing us to confront not only the fragility of safety, but also the shadows we carry within ourselves. The unanswered questions surrounding the Strangler echo louder than words, reminding us that paradise too has its darkness. Remember to like, share the video, and subscribe for more stories that explore not just crimes, but the dark psychology behind them. Some crimes leave no screams, only questions, and some silences echo louder than any confession. Thank you for listening to Criminal Mindcast.
References 1. Newton, M. 2006. The Encyclopedia of Serial Killers. Infobase Publishing. Point 2. Hickey, E. 2015. Serial Murderers and Their Victims. Cengage Learning. Point 3. Douglas, J., and Allshaker, M. 1997. Journey into Darkness. Scribner.